Well, welcome to the Country Podcast. It's great to see you all today on Tuesday, October 31st. Happy Halloween. Bah humbug from my perspective. That's a long story, but I sure wish you all a great Halloween nonetheless. And we're going to get to a few things today. The Tampa Bay Rays will never win the World Series. Religious fundamentalism is malware. But we're going to start today with a new segment. We're going to try looking at one of the Sunday shows, in this case, Meet the Press, with their new host, Kristen Welker. And we're just going to look at their panel discussion. It's about a 7-minute discussion, and we're going to share some comments as we go. So hopefully this works out well. Let's go ahead and pull up the clips and get started. Kristen, if you would, take it away.
NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell, Tolu Olorunipa, White House bureau chief for the Washington Post, Stephen Hayes, editor of The Dispatch, and Jen Psaki, former White House press secretary and host of Inside with Jen Psaki. Thanks to all of you for being here. A lot of ground.
You know, I have to say right away, I thought the show was called Inside Jen Psaki, which is pretty darn funny if you think about it. But thankfully, I have thus been corrected watching this show. It is Inside with Jen Psaki, which still might lead to some suspicious activity. But anyway, let's listen on.
On this Sunday, yes. Kelly, let me start with you and where I left off with Congresswoman Jayapal. The fact that President Biden now has a challenger in this race, Dean Phillips. He's basically, he says it's time to pass the torch. How is President Biden responding? How's the Biden campaign?
Wait a minute. First question. First thing she says is completely wrong. President Biden now has a challenger in the Democratic primary. And isn't that interesting? She has completely, along with the rest of the media and most of big tech, erased Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has been running for president in the Democratic primary for what, I don't remember when he announced, but it's been at least 6 months. And so the first question is, President Biden finally has a challenger in the Democratic Party. Perhaps this is why Robert F. Kennedy Jr. recently left the Democratic Party, because they had it so fixed against him to even had a shot at winning. And we've done work on this. I think we did a podcast. I'm sure you can find on the new country.news an article about RFK for president, I think it's called, in which we detail how little the Democratic Party cares about democracy in the sense of their Democratic primary for president. That's why RFK is out. We're going to hear a little bit about New Hampshire. The voters of New Hampshire's votes will not count in the Democratic primary this time around. But yeah, it just so upsets me that she just tells a bald-faced lie as her initial question. This guy is the second person to challenge Joe Biden. And I think there'll be more.
Well, Kristen, talking with Biden allies about this, they want to very quickly embrace the impulse to just reject Dean Phillips, to say it is irrelevant and that he doesn't have any Democrats with him. We heard that in your interview, and that his access to the ballot is even challenging. What they don't easily dismiss is the fact that he is
his access to the ballot is challenging. Again, this Democratic Party who fights for democracy is not going to make it so that he can be on the ballot. Does that sound democratic?
Regardless of his own candidacy, he is a vehicle giving a voice to what many voters feel, and that is this concern, this anxiety about a president who will be 81 in 3 weeks. And so that is a challenge. They will say, the Biden world, that doesn't change the fact. That's an immutable fact. And so what they want to do is try and turn and bring the focus to the things that Democrats care a great deal about. Fear of Trump returning, certainly issues like abortion, other things that are pocketbook issues. They want to drive the attention there. And, you know, Dean Phillips is someone who's not going to seek advice from the White House because he's the grandson of Dear Abby and is not going to be looking there for any cues.
Chuckle, right? So I think one of the first things I wrote when we started the Country Podcast and the country.news back in late August, I think one of the first things I wrote was about how Joe Biden's not going to be the nominee. I thought at the time it'd be best if neither, and I still think so, neither Joe Biden nor Donald Trump were on the ballot in November, next November. I think maybe Trump will be. I'm not sure yet still. But I don't think Joe Biden will be. And I think Dean Phillips is just the first. I think once he sort of establishes it that it's okay, and I wouldn't be surprised if somebody like Gavin Newsom had him do this first just to see what the reaction was. Because I guarantee you, Gavin Newsom wants to be president, and he's been running for president, sort of half-seas, for a long time now. And why is that? They talked about age and health for sure. Tripping on stairs and stages, shaking hands with people who aren't there, mumbling unintelligibly in front of foreign leaders and the press, seeming to lose awareness. The president shows myriad signs he is not well. He reportedly has been on vacation for 40% of his presidency, and his daily schedule seems to be notoriously light. And unlike 2020, he's not going to be able to sit in the basement and not run. And they're going to have serious challenges doing this. Now, the interesting thing about our race right now is, they're doing everything to keep Biden from campaigning or having challengers. And, there's not going to be a debate. At least that's what they said when RFK was a nominee. Of course, I forgot to mention before, he's now an independent candidate because of the silly things the Democrats did to him. But, they need a nominee. And even Bill Maher and David Ignatius, who are both strong Democrats, have come out and said, we think you did a great job, Joe. We don't want you to run. And so there's a lot of issues there. But what they're not going to talk about, which is part of the big point that I want to make about Joe Biden running, is his corruption scandal. And, we've taken a break from that through the House Speaker and Ukraine funding and this Israeli attack from Hamas. And so, but the Republicans in the House are about to get back to work on the corruption scandal. And it's become increasingly clear to anyone paying attention, Joe Biden's son, Hunter, sold access to Mr. Biden when he was the vice president to foreign interests in China, Ukraine, Russia, and other countries. It's also more likely than not that he took at least one outright bribe. That's from the Ukrainian gas company Burisma to get them to stop, to get the Ukrainian government to stop investigating them. And just last week, the U.S. attorney who was investigating that particular $10 million payment to the Bidens from Burisma was stonewalled by the FBI at every turn. He said this in an interview. It's a scandal of massive proportions, people. It will not go away. And the Republicans are going to harp on it until next November. And I suspect they're going to eventually convince the American public that it is so.
Good point, Kelly O'Donnell, and a good fact there. Tolu, let me kind of pick up on where Kelly left off in the historical context of this. If you look back in time, historically speaking, presidents who get primary challengers, and here you have it, Gerald Ford to Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, Ted Kennedy, George H.W. Bush, Pat Buchanan, all went on to lose. This must be giving Democrats some jitters.
They will never say that publicly, but you also think about Lyndon Johnson, 1968, who faced a pretty significant challenge from Eugene McCarthy in New Hampshire, won with less than 50% of the vote. We have another New Hampshire situation with Dean Phillips focusing his attention there. Now, the White House will never tell you that they're worried or they're concerned. They'll focus on the fact that Dean Phillips has voted with President Biden 100% of the time. But the fact that he's in this race now means that the White House, the Biden campaign, are going to be spending less time talking about the things they want to be talking about. The 4.9% GDP growth last month, the fact that unemployment is under 4%, lower than GDP growth, which hardly ever happens. They're going to have to be spending more time talking about things like the president's age, talking about things like the high cost of living, all the things that Dean Phillips is talking about in his campaign. And Representative Jayapal saying, what is the difference? I think he's going to be spending a lot of time talking about the difference between him and President Biden, and that's going to be a difficult message.
You see how he sneaks in there. Hey, the GDP is great. It was a shocking number. I haven't looked into it yet. Maybe I'll do that later this week. But And unemployment low. I mean, unemployment's low, been around 3 or 4% since before the pandemic. I mean, it popped up and then it went right back down again. So I don't think he deserves much credit for that. It really is a story about people leaving the workforce and not coming back. I could technically be collecting unemployment right now if I really wanted to. I'm not. I don't think it's right, and I'm doing this instead. And I think there's a lot of that going on, as well as people who've just given up. But the story of the economy, everybody knows. It is the huge inflation rates. Prices have gone up so significantly. The dollar that you held in your hand in 2020, less than 3 years later, is worth 84 cents. And so you can buy less. Your wages have not kept up with that. And everybody's hurting and suffering. So, no, he doesn't have an economic message to run on. And so that guy was trying to sneak that in. I like the analogy to Johnson, too. You know, Johnson dropped out of the race. I shall neither seek nor accept the Democratic nomination for President of the United States. Okay? Maybe that's the model here, but I'm telling you, it's not happening.
Set me up perfectly because I had a chance to talk to Dean Phillips. Let me play a little clip of that. Jen, I'm going to get your reaction on the other side.
I'm not running against President Biden. I'm running for the majority of Americans who want somebody different.
But you just announced you're running for president, aren't you? That means you're running against President Biden. That's literally the definition of what that means.
And I'm doing it, and I'm running for president because America deserves to have someone listen to them.
What? The sky is not blue. That's what this. I'm not running against Joe Biden.
Jen, what do you make of that message? Will it fly? Now, he says, look, a border is an area where he sees a difference between himself and President Biden. But he's basically saying, I'm not running against him. I'm running this positive message.
Well, look, I think it remains to be seen if there's Dean Mentum in this campaign. I don't think we see it quite yet. But I think a lot of the Democrats I talk to will say that if this were actually an existential crisis in the Democratic Party, if people were all trying to run away from Biden, you would have a Governor Newsom, a Governor Whitmer, a Governor Wes Moore running.
First of all, it is an existential crisis. It has been for a period of time. They all know it. His polls are in the tank. He's 37% approval rating, 60% of Democrats. Actually, Steve's going to say this in a second, but I'll say it anyway. 60% of Democrats and 75% of general voters do not or want another option than Joe Biden. Okay? So it's already an existential crisis. And again, Governor Newsom, I think, is already running. And again, it remains to be seen if Joe Biden actually is.
They're not. Dean Phillips is not well known. If you're running for president, this is a kind of a strange campaign strategy to put all of your bets in New Hampshire where they're not awarding delegates, where there's not a diverse electorate, which, by the way, is the base of the Democratic Party. So, but you still have to be conscious of every factor when you're running for president.
We are such the party, I'll say it again, we're such the party of democracy that we're not going to count any votes from New Hampshire folks this cycle.
And they certainly are. They certainly are in this moment.
Steve, he's got a math problem, as Jen points out, and the message.
She's got that voice. They certainly are in this moment. Did you hear that? Let's take this back a little bit. They certainly are in this moment.
Every factor when you're running for president, and they certainly are. They certainly are in this moment.
Steve, he's got a math problem, as Jen points out, and the
what's that called? It's called crackle voice or something. They certainly are in this moment. It's crackle voice, I think.
Message challenge, right? I mean, is he running for a younger version of President Biden? Could that resonate and chip away at support in a general?
Well, I would say you shouldn't start your campaign by saying you're not running against the person you're running against. That's a problem on the messages. But look, I think the challenge for the Biden White House, the Biden campaign, he speaks for a lot of Democrats. In our own NBC poll last month, 6 in 10 Democrats said that they wanted a challenger to Joe Biden. 74% of registered voters say that they want Joe Biden to be challenged. They're not comfortable with him. He's speaking for some voters, and it's a problem. We've got 53 weeks to the election, to the general election next year. Joe Biden does make mistakes. You don't have to be sort of Sean Hannity and create some big conspiracy about Joe Biden's mental capabilities. It's a problem, and people are going to see more of it, not less of it, in the next year.
Major test right now for President Biden. He's asking for this new aid package, Jen, from Congress. And the newly minted House Speaker, Mike Johnson, is at the helm, deeply conservative. Will he be able to work with Democrats?
Well, he wants to separate the aid packages, Mike Johnson, according to reports, which is very difficult. The whole point in combining them is to get them both through. He's going to...
Jen Psaki says the whole point of the combining them is to get them through, which, yeah, it's another, bait and switch from our friends in Washington, right? The aid package is, unless it's been changed since they announced it, is $106 billion, $60 billion of which is going to Ukraine. They are leveraging the crisis, the tragedy, the brutal attacks in Israel. And by the way, Israel doesn't need any money from us. They have a surplus budget. There's no reason that we need to send them money. But 60% of this package is going to Ukraine. And I need to find this for you. Just bear with me. What was recently reported by Time magazine about the Ukrainian war. It's a disaster. Kanoka, where is he? Hang on one sec. Oh, I'm on it. Okay, here we go. So, just in, Time magazine reports that Ukraine struggles to rally financial support after its failed counteroffensive and amid allegations of widespread corruption. A top Ukrainian presidential advisor warns that, quote, people are stealing like there's no tomorrow, end quote, when asked about bribes and corruption. 59% of Americans don't want Congress to provide more weapons to Kyiv, up from 35% in June. The southeastern fifth of Ukraine, where the population is predominantly Russian speakers, remains under Russian control. Zelensky's close advisor warns that, quote, he deludes himself. We're out of options. We're not winning, but try telling him that, end quote. Ukraine's shortage of soldiers is more dire than its deficit in arms and ammunition. Draft officers pull men off trains and buses and send them to the front. The death toll has long surpassed 100,000 on each side of the war, forcing the draft of the elderly, raising the average age of Ukrainian soldiers to around 43 years old. Whew. Can you imagine going to war at 50, 55? The average is 43, meaning there's going to be people that are 20. There's going to be people that are 63, probably. Corruption remains widespread, despite Zelensky firing numerous officers and the defense minister. Zelensky is worried that the focus of Ukraine's allies in the U.S. and Europe and of the global media has already shifted to Israel, Palestine, and the Gaza Strip. First of all, we're not an ally of Ukraine. All right? They're not a member of NATO. We've signed no formal treaty with them. They're not a democracy. They're losing this war. The places where the Russians have taken over are predominantly Russian-speaking. It's what Russia wants. They want a land bridge to Crimea and the deep port in the Black Sea. I think it's the Black Sea. Sevastopol, I think. So, this discussion of, oh my God, how Jen Psaki says, how can they separate these two things? It's exactly the point, was to get them both through. No, we're adults. We understand what's happening, and we don't want to send aid to Ukraine. So give us a vote on Ukraine, give us a vote on Israel, and give us a vote on the border funding. All right? We're not children, and we don't like these games. We don't like these Washington games. We don't like them, Jen. It doesn't help anybody.
Pushback within his own caucus, Mike Johnson is. So that makes it difficult for President Biden. Also makes it difficult for Mike Johnson to work and keep the caucus together.
The pushback in the caucus is the uniparty warmongering, bought and paid for members of the military-industrial complex who happen to be U.S. congressmen. That's who she's talking about. It's people like Mike McFaul and, I can't remember, Dan Crenshaw and others. There's many others. But, who cares what those people think?
Hearing Kelly, what's the strategy in the White House to try to work? Is there one?
There is one, and it is to give him a little bit of time to try to see, can he demonstrate leadership. One of the things that stands out about Speaker Johnson is there's no track record of leadership. Never ran a committee. He doesn't have the baggage of some of his predecessors of broken promises and things. That question about splitting the aid is essential because people who know how legislation gets done recognize that fusing those two priorities together is the best way to get Ukraine aid over the line. And where I think Johnson...
That's what I'm saying. She just said the quiet part out loud. This is the only way we're going to get Ukraine aid, is if we stuff it down your throat with the Israeli aid, which we also don't need.
The moment here is that he has all the MAGA views without the bluster, without the bravado. And maybe there's a chance to have things calm down for a moment.
Yeah, Tolu, what do you think about this? Will there be a grace period, a honeymoon period, where Republicans and Democrats say, let's give him a chance to try to work across the aisle?
It does seem like there's a grace period at the moment. It remains to be seen how long that will be. Conservatives in the House are saying that Johnson can push.
There'll be a grace period until the first fight, until the first vote, until the first point of contention. There is no grace in Washington. They're just being quiet now to pretend like they're graceful.
A continuing resolution to keep the government open next month. That was what essentially led to Speaker McCarthy getting tossed out of office. So the fact that he has that grace is something that he can hold on to. But after that, what happens? What happens when we get to January or April and we have to fund the government, and the same issues that McCarthy faced are going to be the same issues that Johnson faces with an ultra-conservative right wing that's willing to
when
take
he needs
on
Democrats.
The same issues he faced. The issues that Kevin McCarthy faced is that he presided over a $2 trillion deficit, that he didn't pass one single appropriations bill in 4 years in leadership. These people.
That's right. Exactly.
Sure.
Steve, very quickly, you've been talking to Republicans. The mood?
Talked to a lot of Republicans in the House. There's a lot of, I think, willingness to give him some flexibility, give him the room to maneuver that he needs. They don't want to go through what they've just gone through over the past 3 weeks.
Yeah, they certainly don't. That's for sure.
Thanks for watching.
Oh, well. You know what I'm saying? These guys that are worried about going through what they went through in the last 3 weeks. You know what happened the last 3 weeks? Nothing. And there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, moving on. We're going to do a little baseball today. I hope all the country subscribers are excited about this. The Tampa Bay Rays will never win the World Series. The anniversary of the fatal Game 6 decision to pull Blake Snell in the 2020 World Series encapsulates the fallacy of statistic-driven baseball. Maybe fallacy is the wrong word. The shortcomings, I would say. The Tampa Bay Rays are an amazing success story. Their ability to make the playoffs, they've been in 5 playoff appearances in the past 5 seasons on an extremely small payroll, is an amazing story about advanced baseball statistics, player evaluation, market valuation, and the declining marginal utility of the next $150 million in payroll. That's right. Over the 5-year period, the Rays have spent a total of $282.5 million in payroll. That's an average of $56.5 million per season. But for comparison, the New York Mets, by far the league leader, spent $334 million in the last season alone. Let me repeat that. The Rays spent $282 million in 5 seasons. The Mets spent $334 million in last season. The Mets won 25 less games than the Rays and finished 4th in the NL East, out of the playoffs. You may think that's an outlier, their payroll, but the league average payroll this year was still an eye-popping $150 million. That's 232% higher than the Rays payroll. And this is consistent over the period. Out of the 30 major league teams, the Rays payroll has never been higher than 24th over those 5 years and averaged 27th. How does this happen? Well, first and foremost, the Rays, in a small market with, let's face it, poor attendance, have always had to try to win with a small payroll. This has forced the team to attempt to change the game and the unwritten rules of baseball. They try to devise new ways to nick wins from teams with higher payrolls. And thus, presumably, these teams also have higher talent. It's not 100% correlated because of the strange way that mostly American sports systems work. You know, your rookie contract is very small. If you're really good under that first contract, you get into arbitration, you make some decent more money. I mean, it's a lot of money, but comparatively decent more money. And then you get to your free agency. I think it's after 7 years. I forget. But that's when you make all the money. And so the older players actually make much more than some of the younger players that might even have more talent and more value to a team. So it's not 100% corollary, but, it is the case that most of the teams have higher talent based on these numbers. The best players in the league make over $40 million per year, which is approximately 71% of the Rays' entire payroll budget for 40 rostered players. So the best and highest paid players are never available to them. The entire situation has forced the Rays to innovate and disrupt conventional thinking to find different ways to win baseball games. Their owner, Stuart Sternberg, is a former Goldman Sachs executive who made billions buying and selling investment vehicles. He has hired other Wall Street quant types to take a fresh look at data, valuations of players, and where there might be arbitrage in the market. They've killed many sacred cows. And the traditions, baseball is a very traditional sport. They've killed a lot of those traditions in the search for new answers for the most important questions. These are the most important questions that a baseball team must answer. How do we stop the other team from scoring? And how do we manufacture the most runs possible? That's the game. So here's a few examples of what the Rays have done. They use statistics and data analysis to revolutionize the infield shift and positioning of players to be where the ball, imagine this, to be where the ball is most likely to go. So, you've got your 4 players in the infield. They were the ones that really implemented putting 3 on one side or 3 on the other side. They even had 4 outfielders sometimes, which is, I've never seen that before or since. Look, the shift was not a new concept. It's been used. My first knowledge of it is against Ted Williams in the 30s and 40s. And they would use it against sort of your traditional left-handed slugger, sort of that became the tradition after Ted Williams. And again, it's tradition. It's not based on facts. So it wasn't a new concept, but the Rays applied it to most batters in ways that had never been tried before. And they would figure out the data, where this person hits the ball and put people there. Imagine that. They began this in 2008 and became the major league standard in the 2010s. It affected the number of hits achieved and runs scored by opponents so effectively that the MLB banned the practice this past season in its quest to make baseball more entertaining. Fans want runs and fans want hits, apparently. Number 2, 5 of the 10 highest paid players are starting pitchers in the league. As these players are completely out of reach for the Rays, they have revolutionized the traditional pitching rotation by adding relief pitchers as starters, now called openers. This began in 2018 when the Rays did not have 5 recognizable starters, and most people thought they were going to be terrible. They sort of surprised or beat expectations by winning. I think they won 80 games or something, about half of their games. So they didn't have those starters on the roster, and the opener was born. I think it was Sergio Romo. Romo, I think was his name. They made a practice of that many teams copied, and has become another standard they invented. Number 3, likewise, the Rays have had to make do with other marginal starting pitchers. So they don't have the best. The ones they do, they're not as good. So one of the keys to this success has been limiting their starters' exposure to hitters. The Rays regularly pull starters after they've gone 2 times through the opposing batting order. There's a long-known stat that when batters come up 3rd time in a game against the same pitcher, they've seen enough pitches and they kind of know how the curveball or whatever they're throwing is going to move and whether the fastball moves and how they're going to pitch to them, and they do better. The numbers show it. So by pulling those starters after 2, they not only lead to lower pitch counts, but better results. So that's another factor. 4, relief pitchers are much cheaper from a salary perspective than starters. And when you get less innings from starting pitchers than other teams, it means you need more innings from relievers to finish the games. To accomplish this, the Rays have made managing a Major League 40-man roster an art form, bringing pitching arms back and forth between the minors and majors to eat up innings and get outs. So they end up, I think one year, if I recall it right, they had used 30 people, 30 relievers in a single. That's more than the entire roster is supposed to be, right? And I can't find the stat, but I would bet that they make more roster moves than any team in the MLB. And the MLB is likewise cracking down on this practice. They're going to limit the number of pitchers that you're allowed to have on your staff. It seems that everything that the Rays try to do, but MLB wants to stop. But that's a story for another day. In terms of Wall Street trading, the Rays have made big trades to sell players at the peak of their value, especially in the case of pitchers, and also when the salary rules will lead the player's contract to be unaffordable for the Rays. So remember I said you start with a rookie contract, and then you have arbitration, and by the time you get to free agency, the Rays can't afford you. You're going to get a big multi-year deal. If you're really good, it's going to be 10 years, $300 million, things like this. You see it all the time. They can't afford that. And so they trade these players before they get to free agency to try and get some value back. They have a long history of trading their top players for prospects and getting rich on the deals. And they've gotten a plethora of players who have been major league pieces they've used to win pennants doing this. The most famous is Victor Zambrano for Scott Kazmir. That's the one that always gets Mets fans. I like to put it to the Mets fans, apparently. Number 6, the Rays also take chances on injured or struggling former stars to see if they can get value out of them. These include people like Carlos Pena, Troy Percival, Fernando Rodney, Grant Balfour, Joel Peralta, Nathan Eovaldi. Their current roster is made up of players who struggled elsewhere, including Christian Bethancourt, Yandy Diaz, Isaac Paredes, Randy Arozarena, Jose Siri, Manuel Margot, Harold Ramirez, Drew Rasmussen, Jeffrey Springs. The list goes on and on. 7, the Rays instituted a major effort to sign Latin American players early to secure their rights and leverage the friendly rookie contracts to maximize results. MLB.com reports that they are the, quote, one of the most active and respected teams on the international market, end quote. This led to the Rays to field the first ever all-Latino team this year. It's pretty cool. All 9 of the starting lineup were of Latin descent. It's pretty neat to see. 8, finally, the Rays are pitcher whisperers. Tom Verducci says that this particular skill is, quote, the envy of the rest of the MLB, end quote. Using statistics and analysis, they have rehabilitated the career of countless journeyman relievers, some cases turning them into starters, and in others teaching their new pitches or pitch selection and sequencing to improve results dramatically. So these are some of the ways the Rays win in the regular season, despite all the odds against them. Does that translate into postseason victories? No. Despite their success, the Rays have not made it past the division series in 4 of the last 5 years. So not, you have wild card, then the division series, and then you go to the league championship and then the World Series. So they haven't made it past the second round, except for one time. And indeed, their playoff record over these 5 years is 15-19, a 25% decline in their winning percentage compared to the regular season. Why does this happen? The truth of the matter is that steps they've taken to improve their results pays dividends over a long 162-game season. Advantages in statistics and data play out over larger sample sizes, and the too long major league season levels out statistical anomalies and allows the Rays to win games against more talented teams. The playoffs are, however, an entirely different game. First, the teams in the playoffs are obviously the cream of the crop. It's tougher competition. These playoff teams have, with the exception of the Rays, some of the best players in the game, able to take over a short series, take over a game, especially with starting pitching. I mean, 3 great starting pitchers can win a series all on their own, almost. You just need a couple runs. And the Rays, despite their best efforts, usually do not have the caliber of pitchers to do this, at least by the time they make the playoffs. We started this year with a fabulous pitching staff. Everybody got injured. That might also be an issue. Second, the short nature of the playoff competition. It can be as little as 1 game. They used to have a 1-game wild card. I think the Rays lost one of those in this 5-year span. Up to 7 games, but they're still very short series. It muddles the statistical nature of the Rays strategy. Statistics do not apply to the individual or individual events. So even if the Rays could win a series against a more talented team over a 20 or 25 game span, they can lose 3 in a row very easily and be out. In fact, I think their strategy sort of begets an easier path to that for their opponents. They can have streaks of, they won 21 games in a row to start the season, but they had streaks where they played very poorly as well. And so their results in the playoffs show this is so. Third, and again because of the small sample size, playoff baseball games are often won with emotion. Playing the hot hand, counting on great players to step up and win in the moment. It's why you pay them $40 million, is to win playoff games. baseball results, especially hitting, are streaky in nature and confound statistics in small sample sizes. More talented players are much more likely to dominate a playoff game for these reasons. And nothing demonstrates the shortcomings of the Rays way better than Game 6 of the 2020 World Series. I was there. And they were winning. They had that game in their hand. But manager Kevin Cash made a statistical decision to pull Blake Snell from the game. Snell had pitched 5 1/3 innings of lights-out baseball. He struck out 9. He'd only thrown 73 pitches and only given up 1 hit to the extremely talented Dodgers. But there, with 1 out in the 6th inning, Snell gave up his 2nd hit of the night and was suddenly pulled from the game. I'm sure the statistics, the Rays way, if you will, told Cash that he had better matchups in the bullpen. But this was a fatal decision. Even after the game, some of the Dodgers were interviewed, and they said, we couldn't believe, number one, that he was taking him out. And we were so excited, number two, that was happening and we were going to have a chance to win this game. When your opponents recognize it's a fatal decision, it's a fatal decision. I think Snell had the hot hand and could have gone 3 more innings. Shutout baseball. Instead, in came Nick Anderson, who threw a wild pitch and then gave up a homer to Mookie Betts. Game over. 2-1. Series over. 4-2. Today is the 3rd anniversary. And it's not today. I wrote this earlier, but it was on Friday. It's the 3rd anniversary of this debacle that demonstrates more clearly than anything else that the statistical approach to baseball can win over a long season, but falls short in the most important moments. Until such time as the Rays are able to retain or sign top talent or devise a strategy heretofore unseen to win their way in the most important moments in baseball, the playoffs, it's highly unlikely they will ever win a World Series. So we end tonight with a very serious topic. And I don't mean to disparage any person or anyone's religious beliefs. But I think we need to talk about religious fundamentalism. It's malware. It may have its place in the survival of the species, but you better hope you're not there when it's needed, if it's needed. So when I was a young man, the Crusades, a series of religious wars initiated, supported, and sometimes directed by the Roman Catholic Church of the medieval period, were adventurous stories about good men combating evil. Robin Hood, Ivanhoe, El Cid, Richard the Lionheart, and others were heroes fighting for the rightness of God and Christianity. In real history, Pope Urban II in 1095, that's AD, called the councils of Placentia and Clermont to mobilize Western Europe to conquer Jerusalem and establish a Christian kingdom in the Holy Land. This was the most successful of the Crusades, the First Crusade, and in late 1099, the Christian army breached the walls of Jerusalem. They sacked the city and established a kingdom of Jerusalem, the kingdom of Jerusalem. I think it lasted for about 40 or 50 years, my memory serves. But you should cue the stories of the French knight who failed to return home with the Holy Grail, only to be found by Indiana Jones centuries later. Or the story of some other French knights discovering amazingly sacred texts in Jerusalem and founding a secret religious cult. Some believe it was the Knights Templar, who ruled the known world for the next 2 centuries. Suffice it to say, the Crusades were a source for much history, much historical fiction, and certainly some conspiracy theories that fascinate to this day. But it was later that I learned of other Crusades. Depending on how you count them, there are as few as 8. Those were the 8 main Crusades that went to try and take back the Holy Land, Jerusalem, and the area. But there were also dozens of smaller crusades, including the Albigensian Crusade, which just means people from Albi. But it's also known as the Cathar Crusade. This crusade, which lasted 20 years from 1209 AD to 1229, was a military campaign initiated by Pope Innocent III. What a name, huh? Innocent III. You can't make this up. He's initiating military campaigns, this, a holy Christian man named Innocent, to eliminate a sect of Christianity known as Catharism in southern France. If you know the word cathartic, it's about the Cathars. These poor Cathars were a threat to the church and the clergy, as they believed in the anti-materialism of the Christian message, which includes perfection and poverty, and preaching with a rejection of the physical realm. Their theology also threatened blasphemy, as they believed in Gnosticism and a dualistic nature of God. This directly is a problem for the church. So Gnosticism is the concept that you don't really need a church. You should have a direct relationship with God without a third intermediary, or a priest, basically. You don't need him. And then they also believed, if my memory serves, it's been probably 10 years since I read about the Cathars, but they believed in a dualistic nature of God. So they actually believed that God, Yahweh, in the Old Testament was not the supreme being, that he was actually an evil, sort of Loki sort of type that was constantly messing with humans and did not have their best interests at heart, and that there was a higher God that was trying to break through, that was the serpent. So you can see why this caused some consternation for the Christians. It attracted the rage of Innocent III, his clergy and local churches, one of whom, you think about the serpent, right? He helped them to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil and other things, open their eyes to the world. So it's an interesting take. Anyway, this attracted the rage of Innocent III, his clergy and local churches, one of which, in Tours, declared all Cathars should be put in prison and their property confiscated. That happened in 1163. It wasn't enough, though. And so Innocent made his proclamation. The open war began in 1209, and by 1244, the Cathars were gone. They were all dead or hiding. And so, estimates. So they're sketchy. Considering the time frame and that Winters write all the histories, the estimates are that at least 200,000 and perhaps as many as 1 million Cathars died that were killed in this holy war. In fact, the scholar who coined the term genocide, obviously he was referring to the Jewish Holocaust in Germany and Eastern Europe in the 30s and 40s. His name is Raphael Lemkin. He listed this crusade as one of the history's genocides. So the Christian fundamentalists of the medieval period between 1095 and 1291 fought dozens of crusades across Europe and the Middle East to eliminate populations of infidels and to win back sacred lands in Jerusalem and the Levant. Estimates are that between 1.2 million and 4 million died across these wars to annihilate blasphemers, infidels, and heretics in the approved religion. This was all begotten approximately 1100 to 1300 years after the life of Jesus. Today we face existential threats from another group of religious fundamentalists, in this case radical Islamists, who wish to rid the world of blasphemers, infidels, and heretics of the approved religion about 1400 years after the life of Muhammad. From where does this fundamentalism arise? Well, there's a gentleman named Stephen Pressfield. He wrote The Legend of Bagger Vance, but he's got a book called The War of Art. I've recommended it a number of times. This is from my copy. It's from pages 34 to 35. This is from Stephen Pressfield. In the fundamentalist view, the truth is not out there awaiting revelation. It has already been revealed. The word of God has been spoken and recorded by his prophet, be he Jesus, Muhammad, or Karl Marx. That's right. Fundamentalism isn't just religious. No, this is an aside. This isn't him talking. Fundamentalism is not just religious. Communists can be fundamentalists. All right, so let's keep going. Fundamentalism is the philosophy of the powerless, the conquered, the displaced, and the dispossessed. Its spawning ground is the wreckage of political and military defeat, as Hebrew fundamentalism arose during the Babylonian captivity, as white Christian fundamentalism appeared in the American South during Reconstruction, as the notion of the master race evolved in Germany following World War I. In such desperate times, the vanquished race would perish without a doctrine that restored hope and pride. Islamic fundamentalism ascends from the same landscape of despair and possesses the same tremendous and potent appeal. What exactly is this despair? It's the despair of freedom. the dislocation and emasculation experienced by the individual cut free from the familiar and comforting structures of the tribe and the clan, the village and the family. This despair is the modern state of modern life. It is the state of modern life. The fundamentalist cannot stand freedom. He cannot find his way into the future, so he retreats to the past. He returns in imagination to the glory days of his race, and he seeks to reconstitute both them and himself in their purer, more virtuous light. He gets back to basics, to fundamentals. Now, certainly the fundamentalist program, and I like this concept, right? Like the human brain is a computer. It's running a bunch of programs all the time. One of them is helping me to breathe. One of them blinks my eyes. It makes my hands move. It lets my mouth speak. There's all these programs running right now. And so the fundamentalist is a program, in my opinion. And it must have gotten the human race through tremendously hard times. There's no reason why it would still exist if it hadn't, from an evolutionary perspective, right? As the world caves in and all lose hope, the fundamentalist solution can be a short-term fix for the survival of the tribe. Perhaps fundamentalism has its place in such a time, just as electric shocks radiating through your chest have their place when your heart stops. Perhaps that time is now, but for all of our sake, I sure hope not. It spells doom for what happens next. It's a fundamental collapse that happens next, a collapse of society, followed by a fundamental reprogramming that involves a whole lot of bad outcomes while that goes on. It's the same cycle of, hard times create hard men, create good times, create soft men, create hard times. It's the same thing. Soft men are fundamentalists. Today we have again been drawn into a war against Islamic fundamentalists who cannot stand freedom. They cannot find their way in the futuristic world of the West, so they seek to destroy it and its practitioners from the face of the earth. There is no better symbol of modernity than the Jewish state of Israel, which is high-tech, democratic, and free. Obviously, the roots of animosity go much deeper amongst the Jews and the Arabs, but this is the best interpretation of the current struggle in the past 100 years. Islamic fundamentalism is not the only fundamentalist challenge in today's world. According to Gallup, and as we said before, it's not just religious, but in this case, there's another one. According to Gallup, 40% of Americans believe that, quote, God created human beings pretty much in their present form at one time within the last 10,000 years or so, end quote. This is a creationist view of the world. And in its current form, it's worked back from texts in the Bible by the Christian fundamentalists of the post-Civil War South in America. It was and is an outright rejection of the miraculous work done since the Enlightenment to attempt to develop an accurate, tested, and confirmed model of the universe. And we do that through physics, through astronomy, through geology, through biology, through evolution, and chemistry. Almost every major modern technology and convenience can be traced back to these sciences. From fax machines, well, we don't use those anymore, to Wi-Fi, to smartphones, to, the drugs that we take like penicillin. These are all, things that were gotten out of this enlightenment and out of this science of physics and astronomy and geology and biology and chemistry. But the Christian fundamentalist rejects them all. As stewards of modern society and shepherds of the human story, we must remain vigilant of all fundamentalism. The Christian fundamentalists, the Islamic fundamentalists, the communist fundamentalists, the progressive fundamentalists, the conservative fundamentalists. I mean, a great example is these protests that are happening right now from the progressives in America and around the world supporting Hamas because they see things as just oppressor and oppressee. So that's a form of fundamentalism. It has no relation to the model of what the actual world is. And it's causing them to support ridiculously brutal, awful things. It's insane. All of these fundamentalists will attempt to tear down the modern world and return it to one in which they are again, or for the first time, superior. That path leads to death. It leads to destruction, and in most cases, genocide. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. That's from Yoda, from the Phantom Menace. And that's a good way to end the podcast. Thanks so much for being here, listening, and watching. Please go to thecountry.news and subscribe. Have a great day. Hey, all right. Thanks for listening to The Country. If you like what we're doing, we're just starting out and we're trying to build a following to make this work. If you like this podcast, would you please subscribe? Maybe share it with a couple friends. Heck, even post it on social media. What could be the harm? We'd really appreciate your help, and we really thank you for your support. As always, please go to thecountry.news and subscribe there as well. Thanks so much. See ya!